Hey reader, welcome back to the channel. This is Centaur here, and today we are continuing in our not how to win series, and just a quick reiteration and comment based on the feedback I got last week on the first video in this series. This is not an attempt to show you how to win at all costs. In fact, this whole channel is not devoted toward that. I have devoted a lot more time talking about things that are off meta than I think any other content creator in the bolt action space. That's not the purpose. Okay, the purpose of this series is to teach you, hey, if you know that you're going to be playing a specific scenario because your buddies want to get together, you want to play a game, you're going into a tournament, and the tournament pack has released it. Just some notes and thoughts that might be helpful in guiding, especially newer players to the game, which is kind of what my channel specializes in, to help you get ideas of how you might go about getting a little more out of your list. Some small changes that might go a long way. And obviously, if you're a veteran of bolt action and you've been playing quite a few games, we, as newer players to the game, would very much appreciate hearing your thoughts on what we can do better. So please do leave those down below. But today we're looking at key positions. And so we're going to be looking at, how do we get the most out of these units? How do we get them to perform a little bit better? Which units are inherently going to perform well for what the scoring conditions are? Which units might find they have a little more trouble, which doesn't mean leave them at home. It just means you got to work on them in order to get them to work, right? You can run whatever you want, okay? We're going to look at deployment and terrain considerations, how that can help you out, reserves and outflanking, and whether or not those are good ideas, and then some potential changes that I would recommend, as well as examples of what those look like from the Zern mission pack, which you can download using the code down below. So looking first at the victory condition overview for key positions, you're going to have D3 plus 4 objectives placed across the map. So it's going to be 5 to 7 objectives. I tend to find 5 is a pretty good number, especially for newer players, because it isn't so many different things. And 5 means if you have one guy who has like 12 order dice worth of units and another guy who has like 20 dice worth of order units, you might find that if you have 7, the guy with 12 is inherently not going to be able to push like 4 of them, right? And so because of that, he's probably going to lose. It's just the way it is. And so the result is with 5, it's like, well, if I stick like 1 or 2 of my units on each of my back objectives, and I'm pushing up to try to take 1 or 2 more, even a guy with lower order dice count at least has a shot, right? He has a way to be able to do it. So personally, I prefer 5. I also personally prefer not to have an even number, just because I'd prefer there not be draws. There are still ways to get draws in this game, potentially, I suppose. But this at least helps to mitigate the chance of getting draws in a scenario such as this. Conditions are really simple. You score 2 victory points for each objective that you fully control. So you have to end your activation within infantry or artillery unit within 3 inches of the objective. And at the end of that activation, not at the end of the turn, but at the end of the activation, there has to be no enemy units within 3 inches of it. And then it flips to you. It becomes your objective. Okay. And then at the end of the game, if you have 2 or more victory points more than the other person, aka 1 more objective than the other person, then your side has won. If anything else has happened, which would be if there's a tie between them, then it's a draw. Okay. This is, by the way, better worded, I think, than last edition. Last edition, they just said count them up, but they didn't really include victory points in the whole scoring thing, which meant that if you were running an event and you were trying to break ties based on number of victory points secured, it was a little tricky to do if you included something like key positions. And key positions was one of the most common scenes in the tournament scene because it encourages maneuver warfare. It doesn't necessarily incentivize just sitting back, although we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about the one change that I would make. And it also, it's a classic maneuver, take the objective sort of thing that everybody already knows. Like, we've all played a game like this, even if it was capture the flag as children, right? So like we all kind of get it as to how this works. This also means that contesting an objective prevents scoring, which means even if you don't think you can remove an enemy off of an objective, you can potentially deny them points, right? In other ways, right? So like if you can get, your guys just within range, right? Okay, they've got a unit over there. They're pushing my tank off, and there's a good chance my tank might be destroyed because of what they're rolling up. Well, I'm just going to throw a couple more units over there just to help make sure we continue to contest it, because they have to clear all of us off before they can score it, right? So that's one of the nice things about it. It does give you a way, even if things are going a little bit south, to try to hold on to points that you have, or to just keep the enemy from getting points, which is always nice. And probably the most important thing you have to remember about this thing is you have to protect the ones you already have pretty much at all costs. The last thing you want is to go all in on something or leave an objective, right? Or something like that after it's already been claimed. And then the enemy swoops around with an outflanking unit or a really fast unit and just snatches one up. The first tournament that I went to, which is this tournament over here, Operation, was it Operation Roundup? I forget what the first one was. But anyway, yeah, the first tournament that I ever went to, I ended up coming in first place, mostly because of the fact that inexperienced guys were the only ones who were going to be able to win. I think I still would have been like top 3 or top 4 had I not been completely brand new to bolt action. But I lost my second game playing against a guy by the name of Ray. And Ray is very good. Mostly plays Soviets, but he decided to go softer and easier on all of us more inexperienced dudes by playing French, which in second edition was a good bit softer than Soviets. Um, and the result was is that I thought I had an objective fully locked up because, to be completely honest, I completely forgot that he had an outflanking cavalry unit. It's the number one issue of your fourth game of bolt action. Sometimes you're looking at the board and you're so focused on the board, you forget about the one unit that's still off the board and is outflanking. Yeah, so I pulled away the units that were over that one because I thought I would need them at a different objective. And sure enough, it didn't work. And so I started losing a bunch of men, and I'm like, oh shoot, that's not good. And then next thing I know, there's an outflanking cavalry unit that just swoops in, end of its activation, flips the objective, and I'm like, oh, that's the game. That's the whole game right there because I didn't protect it. And that it was a good learning experience. I have learned so much from that game. I might even do like an after action report on that game, even though it's been several years ago, just to kind of walk through some of the idiot mistakes I made at my very first tournament, in the hopes that you don't make the same things yourselves. Might be helpful. But TLDR, protect your own objectives. Okay. Make sure that they're secure, make sure they're protected. Keep an eye out on what hasn't yet come onto the board. Keep an eye out on what could move quickly and lock those things down. High performance units. What kind of units tend to do well in key position? And again, I say tend because matchups are a thing. The army that list that you're bringing may not have to follow these things depending on what your opponent's bringing. Like there's a lot of different stuff to consider. But in general, close range units like submachine gun laden troops and flamethrower laden troops tend to do pretty well in this kind of scenario, only because you got to get close to the objective, right? And if you can run up to the objective, wipe something out, and that's the only thing in range, you can flip it that turn instead of, long range shooting at stuff or moving stuff. And then you got to move up and end your activation within 3 inches. And by that time, they might have moved over something else. They might have counter deployed. The benefit of these units, especially since they tend to be a bit smaller so they can fit very nicely in transports, is that you can move them up, you can clear, and you can claim. And then if you need to, you can move up something else that's a little bit softer, and these guys can continue moving, right? They can continue going on to contest additional objectives. Similarly, assault infantry tend to work really well because if you need to clear somebody off of an objective, one of the things that tends to get in the way is cover saves. So one of the easiest ways to get past that is to just blow through the stuff and not really worry about the cover save. Now, admittedly, if they're in a piece of cover, if they're in rough terrain, if they're in a building or something like that, obviously assault infantry are going to vary, right? Cavalry can't assault into a building. Any unit that's going to assault you when you're in a building or in a ruin or in a forest or whatever is going to be giving the defender an advantage, unless they're engineers, to be able to fight first. So, like, there are some trade-offs, but if you have to run off a machine gun team and you've got, say, like a 6-man Polish cavalry section like you see down there, machine gun team is not likely to remove more than one, maybe two of these guys, especially if you take them veteran like I do. And so because of that, especially veteran assault units, they tend to be highly effective. Okay. Machine gun things also ironically tend to work pretty well, mostly because they can soften up stuff for the units that we talked about above. Okay. A lot of machine gun teams, if they're team weapons, they're going to be fixed. If they're on tanks, they're probably not moving more than 9 inches, right? And so because of that, there are definite advantages and benefits from running machine guns alongside other units so that you can kind of soften up, remove some things, clear the path. And then after you've mowed the grass a bit, then the other guys come through and they actually secure the objective for you. Similarly, armored transports. They provide you not only with quick delivery, they also provide you with safe delivery, which is the other big question, right? A truck is a highly efficient way to get a lot of men across the board, unless it gets shot, at which point, hit, wound, no roll on the chart, it's just destroyed. And then the guys are hopping out of it. Okay. There are ways to mitigate the problems with this, but suffice it to say, at least for now, like this is one of the big concerns. It's one of the big considerations when you're walking into it is how do we actually not only get the men up, but get them up safely without losing a lot of casualties in the first place. So in general, armored transports tend to work better in third edition than soft skin transports do. And then finally, durable tanks. Not because they can take an objective. You still have to move an infantry or artillery unit up. But if you move an infantry or artillery unit onto an objective, and then you move a heavy tank with a damage value of 10 within 3 inches of that, in order for the enemy to take that objective from you and wrest control of it from you, they have to not only remove the infantry and artillery units, they have to remove every unit, which means they got to crack your tank open. And that is not necessarily easy to do. Now, which units are likely to struggle? First and foremost, inexperienced squads. They run into several issues. First of all, they're not very good at clearing objectives because they're getting either a -1 to hit at longer ranges, or they're very easy to wound in close combat, which means you might lose a lot of them trying to clear even a single unit off of an objective. The other thing that they have is they have difficulty holding an objective. A lot of them may have difficulties activating, so you may not be able to put suppressive fire down. They're going to have limited ability to survive if they do get shot at, right? Cover saves are great. Cover saves are not perfect. There is no 1+ save in this game, okay? So because of that, inexperienced squads are fine, but they're not necessarily the greatest, I think. I think they are more likely to struggle than other units. Okay. Similarly, light mortar teams, for the exact same reasons. First of all, they do tend to be taken inexperienced, but more than that, when you only have 2 men, you're only rolling 1 dice to try to hit every turn. You don't get the benefit of hit modifiers. Like there's just a lot of things that kind of play against you with light mortar teams. They're nice because they give you a relatively cheap order dice, and you can field 2 of them as part of a rifle platoon, so you're not paying a tax on an officer as well. But at the same time, that's most of what they're going to be contributing to you is order dice in the bag. Not necessarily bad unless you can't crack through what's sitting on objectives, right? In which case, they're the quintessential piccolo playing person trying to help the party, but all they are is a bard, right? So because of that, light mortar teams, they're fine. I'm not saying don't run them. I'm just saying they're likely to struggle with contributing to scores, okay? And then finally, perhaps ironically, the standard light tank is also potentially an issue. So by the standard light tank, what I mean is one of those light tanks, damage value 7, damage value 8, that's got the light AT gun with a coaxial machine gun, possibly with a hull-mounted forward-facing machine gun. You know the one. Almost every nation has one. These ones are tricky because they have very limited clearing potential, right? You only get 1 to 2 machine guns, 3 to 6 shots. You're not going to remove that many bodies, especially past cover. With a light AT gun, you're not actually that likely at removing armor unless it's also really, really light armor. And even then, you're talking what, like 50% chance to roll on the damage chart? With 1 shot, you have to hit first, and then you got to, like, it's not actually that easy to do, right? In addition, they're not very robust. They're relatively easily removed. And so because of that, it's not, again, that you can't run these. In many respects, I mean, they're relatively durable for the cost, right? They're relatively cheap, but you might find that if you're struggling and you're bringing armor that looks like this profile, partially the reason might be that like they're good supporting fire units, but they're not a clearing unit, okay? So you might want to watch for that. In terms of deployment and terrain considerations, first of all, obviously cover is going to be necessary. Okay, you want to deploy your vulnerable units in cover. So you'll notice that the anti-aircraft gun that's over there for my Polish units, 3 out of 4 of the crew are behind the stone wall. You have to wrap pretty far around the lines in order to get to where they are, so they're relatively safe. But they've still got really, really good lines of fire. They've got good line of sight to be able to draw to stuff. You've got one guy who's kind of poking out there just to make sure that you can get really, really good lines of sight. So you want those firing lanes protecting objectives while also scoring, but you want to make sure that they're safe, okay? Second, when it comes to reserves, like if cover is sparse, you can leave men in reserve so that way you aren't starting guys out in the middle of nowhere. Keep in mind that you do have to make sure they arrive at a reasonable time, right? You don't want to keep too much of your army and too much of your firepower specifically in reserve, lest you end up taking a beating on turn 1, and then by the time they're trying to come in on turn 2, it isn't safe anymore. Also keep in mind that if you are going to outflank, which we'll talk about a little bit later when we talk about reserves, like you can do that. It is potentially useful as long as there's a good approach for your outflanking units to actually get to places that are useful to contest, right? Because if your opponent is deploying objectives closer to the center of the board, and you'll see this in the example that we're going to give, there's a whole flank that because of where the objectives are, outflanking from that specific side would not be particularly useful because there wasn't an objective over there, right? And so I'd be foot slogging it effectively from another side, but still from another side, and it might be just as long as if I'd come in regularly. In terms of roads, you want to plan road access for your half-track and wheeled vehicles. Okay, this is useful both because if you've got speedy, zippy armored cars, or if you've got like anti-aircraft half-tracks or things like that running around, you want to make sure they have ease of access to maneuver. You want to make sure they have an easy way to be able to get around the battlefield and hit stuff. Well, at the same time, you don't want to be clogging up stuff for your transports that are going to be bringing in the men that are going to actually take the objective. Okay, so plan that out. In terms of your armored vehicles, don't forget you can use these as mobile cover, right? I mean, we have War Doctrine of the time talking about infantry just walking right behind a Sherman. You can do that, and it is quite effective at getting your men up if you want cover that isn't based on what the terrain is giving you, especially if the terrain is sparse. You can try to hide men behind tanks. Just remember that the larger the squad, the harder it is to hide. Even some of those big, heavy tanks, they're not that wide, right? And while you can always pivot them at the end of their move to turn them to the sides in order to give you more cover for the infantry, just remember side shots will also hurt more, right, against the vast majority of units. So just something to keep in mind, okay? Have cover fire on the objectives. You want to make sure that every turn that you're firing stuff, you are pounding away at units that are on objectives or units that are coming across to your objectives. So you want really cover fire on all of them, right? Both the ones that you're defending and the ones you plan to attack. In terms of reserves and outflanking, first things first, for outflanking, check the deployment rules because obviously sometimes it allows it, sometimes it doesn't, okay? In as much as it does, it can be a really great way to kind of catch people by surprise. So over here, for example, you have a TKS tankette that was able to advance onto the board, and then there's an objective over there at the top right, and he's trying to shoot at the guys that are in the ruin just behind that objective. More on that when we look at the deployment as we go to the battle board a little bit later. But just suffice it to say, it can be effective. Just keep in mind that if your units are really far apart, they can be more easily taken apart. And while that doesn't score points in this scenario type, it does contribute to maybe not being able to actually take an objective. So, just things to think about. The ambush order. Ambush order is extremely useful, both because it will deter and remove outflanking units from actually coming on and hurting you, but it's also just a great way of when the enemy starts maneuvering towards you, if you've got guys in ambush who are looking down that corridor, you can catch them when they're not in cover. And sometimes they may not have much of a choice, right? They could try sitting back and trying to push you off, but if you're already taking more objectives, at some point they've got to push forward into something, right? So suddenly going after your ambush units and risking some of that ambush fire in return is dangerous for them. And then finally, in terms of reserves, again, like you can use reserves. If you get access to something like military police, it tends to be a little bit better. Because, yeah, counter deploying is nice as long as your guys arrive. Military police give you a +1 to the roll as long as it's a vehicle. So, at least it makes sure that your transports carrying your men are going to arrive reliably. Your armor is going to arrive reliably. And then you can use them more better for, counter deploying to the enemies. That way, when they've placed their anti-tank assets, you come in a different place. But also, it allows you to know the enemy position, where their objectives are, what they have protecting each one. And then on turn 2, you can start surging forward with the right tools for the right things. Okay. So what changes would I recommend? So the first thing that I would recommend is that I recommend an odd number of objectives, right? And when you get an odd number of objectives, I think the last one should have to be deployed on the center line. It's still determined in terms of its location by the player who's placing it. Okay, so in that sense, it's not changing. It's not going smack dab in the center of the board. I think that's lazy. But what it does mean, practically speaking, is that while you do have some control over it, you don't have a situation when you have 5 or 7 objective of one person starting with 3 in their deployment zone and another person starting with 2 in their deployment zone, which means player 1, the guy who rolled the highest, now can play a gun line style approach, doesn't have to move out from his location at all. And instead of being a maneuver style scenario, it becomes a gun line style scenario. It effectively becomes kind of a version of seek and destroy, right? And we don't want that. Okay. We want both sides to be working. And so what you do is you say, yeah, you can have close to half in your own deployment zone if you're clever about where you place them and if there's good enough cover within your deployment zone. But you're going to have to come out at some point. And if your enemy comes out first, and they secure that middle objective, then they can just hunker down on those things. And now you got to be the one to come out because they're already winning the game, even though you place that final objective, right? So it encourages maneuver warfare the entire way through instead of everybody being able to sit back half the time and the other half of the people have to go after them in a given game. We cover kind of objective style play, similar to key positions in the Zern mission pack in 2 of our pools, which is why this is 1 of 2, and the other one's going to be 2 of 2. So you have things like sectors and key positions and vantage point, which are part of pool 3, and then we have more that are part of pool 5, okay? And so in this case with pool 3, there are 3 out of the 5 of them that are key positions oriented. You've got sectors, which is the classic one from the last edition where you don't actually have objective markers. You're doing things by quarter zones. So you're scoring based on whether you're in a neutral zone outside of your deployment zone or whether you're in the opponent's deployment zone done through a quarters deployment, which is really nice. You also do score some additional points just for removing units, which is mostly just to keep us from just running around and running around all game long. You do actually have to remove some stuff, which is nice. Key positions is, again, as written, with the one edit being that odd objective should be placed on the center line. And then Vantage Point. Vantage Point, again, doesn't really use like objective markers per se. Instead, you get victory points for each area terrain feature that you control that is within a certain space. So if you control a building, you have to have a unit actually in the building, which is dangerous, right? Because units shooting at the building often get quite a few advantages. Buildings are often considered to be death traps in bolt action. If there's a ruin, if there's a forest, if there's a trench line or other defensive position like a bunker, all of those things, whoever has units in them, they're scoring points potentially at the end of the game based on how many they have control over. This means in an armor heavy meta, you can choose to punt on your rifle platoon. You can go for a tiny number of stuff in your rifle platoon. But you still better have enough units that can actually move into the right kinds of area terrain to be able to control those area terrains, right? And removing units is great, but you're going to have to dig them out probably out of cover because all of those area terrains are going to be giving cover benefits, right? So unless you're relying on indirect fire, you're going to have to get it past a cover save. So things get a little bit different, right? And again, similar for all of these, for our scenarios, we do clarify infiltrator deployment because it can be done abusively with the way it's written in the rulebook. So we clarified it to change it a little bit just to make it a little fairer. Okay. In the second one, in pool 5, it's not just about controlling things oftentimes in the enemy deployment zone. Instead, it's controlling things everywhere. It's a lot of maneuver warfare style stuff, right? So in pool 5, we've got things like point defense. And point defense, you have 5 objectives, but there's a trade-off. Typically, the way it would work is that high roller gets to roll, they choose their side, they place an objective, and then you alternate. The way this one works is that the high roller chooses their side, and then the low roller starts placing. And so the low roller is given the side they're going to have, which could be disadvantageous to them, but they start with more objectives, right? So now they're having more benefits as regards objective deployment because they didn't get to pick which side of the board they got. And I think that's kind of a useful trade-off. It helps to keep things pretty fair again. The second one is field kitchen ahead. It's quite simple. You smell savory food on the other side of the board. And your men start thinking it'd be really great if we could liberate that for the cause. And so you not only get bonuses for having sole control over the objective, which in this case is a field kitchen. You can find STLs, by the way, for field kitchens online, although they're not all that hard to make either. Just, make a wagon, make a little smokestack on it for, for smoke relieving from the from the heating mechanism, and attach some crates right next to it, and there you go. You got yourself a field kitchen, right? It's not that difficult to make. But you also get benefits from removing enemies within your deployment zone. So you don't just score 1 VP for every unit you destroy. They have to be people who made it pretty far in. So there's a trade-off, right? If you let people into your deployment zone, they'll be really close to some of your units. They might wipe out those units, and so you might have difficulty removing them. But if you remove them too early before they can get into your deployment zone, they aren't worth anything. So, and most importantly, of course, what this also is for is that it rewards you for, okay, if people do get into your deployment zone and they take your objective, pound them off of your objective, right? Secure your own, cover your own objective at all costs, like we were talking about before. Okay. Spike the Guns gives 3 howitzers or anti-aircraft guns to each side. They can't really use them per se for the purpose of the mission, but you get benefits for as many of them as you destroy over the course of it. So this goes back to, we've all watched, Band of Brothers, right, where they're spiking the guns, they're trying to remove the flak 88s in order to provide cover for everybody. It's the same concept, right, where we're going in and you're trying to blow these things up at close quarters. You're dropping satchel charges into them and then blowing them up, right? And so because of that, kind of fun. Again, requires you to get into the enemy's deployment zone, work around them. And then the final one is Radar Station. And Radar Station gives a single objective to both sides where you get one of 2 options. You can secure it. You can take it. You can take control of the radar stations. That way High Command has more radar that they can use in the area once you patch it in. Or you can just destroy it. And you get less points for destroying the radar station. But for some people, they're going to look at a scenario at some point and say, this is a lost cause. I can't dislodge all the units that are over there next to their own radar station. It's going to be impossible. And so they're like, well, if we can't destroy it that way, we're just going to shell it with high explosive damage or hit it with a really, really, really big AT gun, right? And by doing that, you're punting on the highest number of points. You're getting lower numbers of points. But for some armies, that might just be the only way that they can do it, right? And so what these are designed to do is they're designed to give the concept of key positions, right? Control the objective, a little more flavor. In the case of Field Kitchen Ahead, literally more flavor, to make things more interesting and to keep the games from getting stale. But to talk through the concept of how you choose and deploy your objectives, we're going to jump really quick now to the battle board so we can see from a recent game that I played roughly how it might work. Okay, so this is the board that we're going to be working with. This is after we've placed the objectives, but before we've started deploying the armies, obviously. So you'll see that over here, this far left-hand side of the board is a little more open. You got a lot of soft cover, but it is a little more of an open maneuver area. So armies that are built more for maneuver and trying to get through things like breakthrough, they might find a little more successful. Key positions, only one of us decided to place an objective on this side. It goes on this side. I had to place first, so I decided to place it here. It's actually beyond 12 inches of my deployment zone, but the thinking is that if I'm going to have units moving up, I'd rather have them moving up into this ruin anyway, and I want that to be scoring. I want it to be able to have potentially a unit behind this shed that could also be scoring, and a unit that is behind the lip of this stone bridge scoring. And because of the river, accessing it is actually relatively limited. You pretty much have to come across where all of these units can easily punch, and where it would take you a little while before you could actually get to it, and the units will be a little easier to defend. He then counters, and this was really smart, by placing it near to the center of the board, but near the church. And what this does, it actually does a couple things. One, any units he has that are on it are probably going to be getting at least soft cover from the hedge, until you start getting really, really, really close to it, right? Because you're probably going to be firing through here or through here, unless you're firing through a very specific corridor, which is relatively well blocked off. He can, of course, hide a unit behind the church that can fire out from behind it, autocannon, AT gun, a mortar even, or something like that, and they would be pretty safe right up until you get to them. Again, a lot of opportunities for cover. He could have a unit inside of the church. The top also comes off, so you could have a unit up there in the steeple, though they wouldn't really be within 3 inches of it, obviously. Yeah, like you could have a unit inside the church, which is also more heavy cover if you're comfortable being inside of a building. Maybe you know that there isn't a lot of HE in the other army. They went for machine guns over and against high explosive damage. But also, and this is smart, technically that back area of the hedge, if more than half of a unit is behind there, they could also be getting cover while protecting this. And all the spaces that are within 3 inches that are not the spaces I just mentioned are completely open ground. So if you want to score, you either got to take the stuff that he's already marked and already going to have, or you got to be in the open in order to actually be within scoring distance, which is really, really smart. So I counter deployed and I put my next one down over here. My thinking being I wanted to potentially have a unit in the ruin. I like placing mortars specifically within ruins. But I also wanted a unit that's behind this stone wall to also be within range, so that way I can put something a little more robust, a little more durable behind there, and then that would still give me scoring abilities. He went on and he decided basically just to give up on that far right-hand side in terms of what he had to protect, which in key positions is really smart. You don't have to defend across the entire board. Keep your guys closer together to protect each other. And so he went back here, and this is really clever because the unit that's in the ruin, as long as they're right up here against this line, they'll be within 3 inches. So just put your lieutenant, the NCO, the sergeant who's commanding the unit, just right there. Maybe if you got a heavier weapon like a light machine gun or a BAR, you put that over there as well. And then everybody else can fill in as needed, possibly even in front of it, and you'll still be fine. He's got this stone wall over here that can also be within 3 inches. And depending on how far you want to stick out, even units behind this building could be within range as well. And they've got some pretty nice corridors going down to where my stuff is firing. And so per our modified rules for key positions, I went ahead and placed the final one on the center line, and I decided to place it here. The thinking being, you got a low stone wall over here, you've got a trench over here, so there's quite a few places you can get good cover. While the enemy, even if they jump into this ruin, they're going to just barely beyond 3 inches. So they got to have some guys sticking out which is fine because then eventually they got to start removing the guys that are actually in the cover in order to stay within range. If that's what they want to do in order to try to contest and then later on control the objective, or they got to come out into the open, or they got to try to push me out of where I am, all of which is really good. And so that's the video. Okay, key positions. It is a fun one, right? Because you're maneuvering to different spots. Relatively easy to understand, but there is a lot of like thinking around and working around things that will be helpful for you. If you have additional thoughts or advice for people, definitely feel free to leave those down below. If I botched anything up, please also let me know that. Totally open to criticism. Look forward to hearing from you guys in the future, and I will see you next time.